The icy wind cuts through soaked clothes as salty spray stings the face, every breath a bitter reminder of the endless ocean. The creaking timbers groan under relentless salt water, a haunting symphony of survival. The horizon blurs in shades of grey, promising land but often delivering only darkness and loneliness. Amid this vast, unforgiving sea, sailors face not just storms but deadly accidents. Ferrules snapping, ropes fraying, decks flooded with seawater. These brave souls, driven by dreams of new worlds, endured unimaginable hardship, risking death with every voyage. Their stories reveal the fragile human spirit clinging to wooden ships amid nature's fury, where even a small iron mishap could be fatal. As you listen, remember the courage that carried them across treacherous waters. If you're passionate about maritime history, hit subscribe to reach 3,000 followers and tell us where you're watching from. Let's keep these stories afloat. You can imagine how it felt when the icy wind cut straight through your soaked clothes, the salty spray stinging your face, and every breath was a bitter reminder of the endless ocean around you. The creaking of the ship's timbers, soaked and swollen from the relentless saltwater, became a constant symphony of survival. The horizon was a blur of grey, and the horizon's promise of land was often just a cruel illusion, fading into another restless night at sea. Today, we're diving into the gritty, human story of those maritime journeys, those long, treacherous voyages during the age of exploration, when ships like caravels, galleons, and Norse carried hopes, fears, and deadly dangers across uncharted waters. Let's start with the ships themselves. These vessels were marvels of colonial engineering, built from massive oak and pine, materials we might think of as sturdy but which had their limits. Craftsmen relied on basic tools, axes, adzes, and hand-forged nails, and techniques handed down through generations. The hulls were layered with planks, sealed with pitch and tar, trying to keep water out during storms and relentless waves. But seawater was a relentless enemy. It seeped through cracks, rotted wood, and threatened to sink ships. Maintenance was constant, and even a small leak could be deadly when you were months from land. Now, picture life aboard one of these ships. The hierarchy was strict. The captain, often a hardened veteran, stood at the top, making grim decisions amid chaos. Below him, the master and officers managed the navigation and discipline. The crew, mostly sailors and laborers, endured unimaginable hardships. They slept in hammocks crammed into tight quarters, sometimes just a few inches apart, surrounded by damp, moldy wood and stale air. The smell of salt, sweat, and rotting food was a constant assault. Food was basic: dried beans, salted meat, hardtack that could shatter teeth, and fresh provisions were a rare, precious gift. Survivor stories are filled with pain. Diseases like scurvy caused by vitamin deficiency ravaged crews. Fresh water was scarce, and the water that was available turned brackish and foul. The cold could be brutal. Imagine standing soaked in freezing spray, shivering for days on end. For many sailors, death was a constant companion. Nautical instruments like the astrolabe, compass, and later the sextant were rudimentary but vital. These tools guided ships through fog, storms, and night, but human error and bad weather still led to wrecks and tragedies. Speaking of wrecks, the ocean was a graveyard for thousands of ships. Some simply sank in storms. Others ran aground on unseen reefs. The loss of a ship meant loss of life, sometimes entire crews, plus cargo and treasure. The human toll was staggering. It's estimated that during the height of the colonial era, about 20% of ships never made it home. Many sailors faced not only death but psychological torment. Long voyages meant endless monotony, fear of the unknown, and the loneliness of being cut off from everything familiar. One particularly harrowing aspect was the technical challenge of navigation. Without GPS, sailors relied on the stars, the sun, and simple tools. When clouds blocked the sky or they lost sight of land, it was like sailing blind. Sailors memorized the patterns of the night sky, but mistakes could be fatal, leading to shipwrecks on rocky coasts or drifting into storms. In those days, a miscalculation or a sudden gale could turn a voyage into a nightmare. And yet these crews pushed on, driven by the promise of new lands, riches, or a better life. The psychological burden was immense. Imagine sleeping on a rocking wooden deck with the howling wind and the shouts of crew members fighting or praying. Many sailors suffered from despair, especially during long periods of calm when ships were becalmed and food spoiled amidst the heat. Others faced the horror of disease outbreaks, which spread faster than the crew could recover. The worst part? The knowledge that a sudden accident, a stray ferro, iron object, like a loose nail, an anchor, or a piece of metal broken during storms, could cause a fatal injury. A simple cut from a rusty piece of iron could infect and kill, especially without proper medicine. Those ferro accidents, small cuts, splinters, or even collisions with metal fittings could be deadly. Infection was common, and with limited medical knowledge, many would bleed out or succumb to fever. The cases were countless: a sailor slicing his finger on a jagged iron bolt, a crew member falling against a rusty hull, or metal fittings that, once broken, became dangerous projectiles. All these dangers paint a picture of incredible human resilience. These sailors weren't just explorers, they were survivors. They faced freezing temperatures, starvation, disease, and mental torment with astonishing grit. The stories of their suffering remind us how fragile life was amid the vast, indifferent ocean. Each shipwreck, each death, is a stark testament to the perilous nature of the age of exploration, a time when the human spirit pushed into the unknown, often paying the ultimate price. And so, as we look back, it's crucial to remember the human stories behind the sailing charts and discovery maps. Every voyage was a battle for survival, against storms, disease, and despair. These tales aren't just about explorers reaching new lands. They're about the countless lives lost or forever changed in the endless, unforgiving sea. Can you imagine how it feels to be crammed onto a wooden ship, the air thick with salt and mold, the deck beneath your feet creaking like an old bone, the wind cutting through thin sails, and the relentless spray of the ocean soaking every inch of you? It's cold, brutal, and unrelenting. Now picture that for months on end, with no land in sight, just endless blue and a sky. That can turn from a gentle blue to a furious storm in moments. Today we're going to dive into the gritty reality of those long voyages, especially the deadly dangers lurking inside those floating prisons. If you're into history, survival, and the human spirit fighting against nature's worst, stick around. And hey, if you like stories like this, just hit that like button. Helps me keep going. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on those notifications for more maritime tales that make your skin crawl. Now, let's set the scene. It's the age of exploration, the 15th to 18th centuries, when explorers, traders, and pirates dared to venture into uncharted waters. Ships were the backbone of this global push, but they weren't the sleek vessels we see today. No, these were bulky, wooden behemoths, often built from over 1,000 trees each. Some say up to 2,000, depending on the size. The crews, usually 80 to 150 men packed into tight quarters. Imagine that, a floating sardine can with little room to breathe, let alone move. And what was the goal? To find new lands, spices, gold, and establish colonies. Things worth risking your life for, or so they thought. But here's the brutal truth. The journey was a nightmare for many. How many? Well, mortality rates could reach up to 20% on some voyages. Yes, 1 in 5 sailors wouldn't see land again. And it wasn't just the storms or pirates. It was often something far more insidious, the deadly ferro accidents that could happen at any moment. Today we're going to reveal the horror behind those metal mishaps and the human toll they took. You see, ships of the time weren't made of iron, but iron played a key role in their equipment. Anchors, cannons, tools, and the worst, most lethal accidents involved ferro, or iron, broken or misused. Imagine a crew working, hammering, or repairing in the tight spaces of a ship. Suddenly, a piece of iron snaps or slips, cruel but real. These accidents could tear through a man's body like a lightning bolt, iron shards flying through the air, sharp and cold, slicing skin and gouging flesh. Blood sprays, screams echo over the roaring ocean. It was chaos and survival was slim. But it wasn't just the ferro accidents that haunted these voyages. The ships themselves, often made from over 1,000 wooden planks, were a constant threat: wear and tear, rot, and the threat of and the fire. Imagine the panic when a spark ignites the ship's powder magazine, a fiery explosion that leaves only wreckage and ghost stories. But back to ferro, that metal component. It could break during a storm or a fight, sending jagged pieces flying, and those iron nails and fittings they could loosen would, over time, jamming or snapping, causing accidents that could be deadly. Now imagine the human toll. A sailor's life was brutal, gengivas bleeding, teeth falling out from scurvy, and wounds from ferro accidents often going untreated. No antibiotics, just saltwater rinses and prayer. If someone lost a finger or got a severe cut, infection was nearly guaranteed. And the cold, oh the cold, the wind slicing through your clothes, the freezing spray hitting your face at night, making your skin numb and your teeth chatter, like living with a constant ice pick in your bones. And when ferro accidents struck, it was often during maintenance or combat. The crew working with hammers, chisels, and iron tools, sometimes in a rush. A slip, a miscalculated swing, and bam, an iron shard pierces a leg or a hand. The pain, excruciating. The bleeding, unstoppable. Without proper medical aid, infection sets in fast. Imagine the screams, the despair. Many sailors saw their lives cut short not just by storms or disease, but by these preventable ferro mishaps. But it gets worse. Sometimes ships would break apart from the stress of storms or rotten wood, leaving sailors stranded on a tiny life raft or the debris of a wreck. In those moments they'd cling to wreckage, freezing and starving, their bodies battered by salt and wind. And still, ferro accidents could happen during rescue attempts. Iron tools snagging, sailors falling into the icy water, accident injuries compounded by exposure. And don't forget the psychological toll. Imagine the constant fear of injury, the dread of ferro shards flying through the air, or the terror of a fire starting in the powder room. The mental anguish of knowing that one mistake or misfortune could end your life. Many sailors, after a ferro accident, would suffer from trauma, nightmares, and anxiety, an invisible wound that lingered long after they returned to port. The human body and mind bore the scars of these voyages, just as much as the physical injuries. Now, how did they try to survive? They used what they had: improvised bandages, seawater for antiseptic, though it often caused more pain than help, and sheer grit. Sometimes the captain's crew would bandage wounds with strips of sailcloth, pressing hard to slow bleeding. They'd cauterize wounds with heated metal, another iron element, hoping to stop infection, though it was painful and risky. And when ferro accidents happened, the injured sailor was often left to bleed out or succumb to infection unless quick help was available, rare in the middle of the ocean. All these dangers, storms, ferro accidents, disease, starvation, created a brutal environment. And it's important to remember, these sailors weren't just numbers or faceless crew members. They were humans, men who fought to keep their ship afloat, their comrades alive, and their dreams of discovery alive. They accepted the risks because the promise of wealth, adventure, and empire was worth it, or so they believed. So if you want to know exactly how ferro accidents could turn a voyage into a nightmare, or how sailors faced death with little more than hope and iron tools, keep watching. The stories of survival, tragedy, and resilience are written in the scars they carried. And trust me, understanding this makes us appreciate how far we've come today, how modern ships, safety standards, and medical care save lives that once were lost in a single crack of ferro or a burst of storm fury. But I won't spoil everything now. There's so much more to uncover. Stories of heroism, despair, and human endurance. If you're into this kind of history, I've got plenty more stories that will keep your eyes wide open. Just stick around. Remember, behind every shipwreck or accident, there's a human story waiting to be told. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a wooden ship hundreds of years ago, in the age of discovery. The sun beats down, the salty breeze stings your nostrils, and the creak of the hull underfoot is constant. Now picture the chaos beneath that deck, where danger lurks in every creak and squeal of the ship. It's not just storms or pirates you need to worry about. There's a silent, deadly threat that could strike at any moment. Ferro accidents. Ferro, meaning iron, was the backbone of these ships. Without it, the sailing world would collapse. The iron bolts, nails, fittings, that's what held these fragile floating prisons together. But iron was a double-edged sword. It kept the ship intact, but it also created dangerous weaknesses. Cracks, corrosion, and sudden failures could transform a voyage into a nightmare. And the worst part? When ferro accidents happened, they often led to injuries that no sailor could ignore. They'd see men bleeding, sometimes fatally, because of a Snapped chain or a broken bolt. Let's step into the shoes of those sailors. You're on the deck during a storm, rain pelting down, wind howling like a banshee. Suddenly, a loud crack echoes through the ship. You look up. One of the iron support beams snaps, sending a shower of sparks and splinters. Flying. The ship shudders violently. Men tumble, screams echo. That's ferro failure. An instant catastrophe. Back then, fixing this was no quick patch. You had no modern welding or steel reinforcements. The sailors relied on what's called cold repair, improvised solutions with the limited tools they had. They'd grab strips of sailcloth, torn from torn sails, and press them against cracks using ropes to hold them tight. But that's just a temporary fix. The real fix demanded ironwork, heated and hammered into shape, or wooden braces clamped up. Sometimes they'd even pry open the crack, pour molten lead or heated iron to seal it. But that was dangerous, the heat, the sparks, the risk of setting the ship on fire, cruel but real. And the danger was relentless. A broken bolt could lead to a chain snapping, which might cause the mast to collapse. That, in turn, could cause a cascade of failures, loss of rigging, leaks, even sinking. One man's misfortune could make the whole vessel vulnerable, and it wasn't just the ship that paid the price, it was the sailors. Men with gashes in their hands, shattered fingers crushed by falling metal, or worse, ripped apart by flying shards of iron, during a ferro failure. Now imagine the human toll. Sometimes a sailor's leg or arm would be caught in the falling debris. No antiseptics like we have today, just seawater, salty and stingingly cold, poured over wounds. It might slow infection temporarily, but often infections took hold. Gums would bleed, teeth loosen, fever would set in. They'd fight in agony, sometimes for days, until infection or blood loss claimed them. For others, the pain was so intense they'd faint, only to wake up with their clothes soaked in blood, trembling from shock. One harrowing story involves a sailor named Marco, who was caught during a ferro accident. An iron bolt sheared apart, leaving a jagged jag in his leg. The crew, desperate, tore off a piece of sailcloth, pressing it into the wound to slow bleeding. But no antiseptic was at hand, only seawater, which made the pain worse. They had to cauterize the wound with heated iron to stop bleeding and infection. Imagine the screams, the smell of burning flesh mingling with the salty air. That was their grim reality. But it wasn't just accidents at sea. The ship itself was a ticking time bomb. Iron corrosion was constant. Salt water seeped into every crevice, eating away at the metal and wood alike. They used mixtures of vinegar and tar to slow rust, but it was a losing battle. About 20% of shipwrecks during this era were caused by ferro failures, at least one iron part giving out at a critical moment, and when ferro failed, it often meant disaster, sinking, capsizing, or losing the entire crew. Up to 2,000 trees could be cut down for a single ship, and yet, despite all that effort, the ship's metal components could weaken over time. The sailors knew this. They kept a wary eye on the iron fittings, but often you could see the cracks only when catastrophe was imminent. So what did they do? How did they survive such relentless dangers? Well, it wasn't just luck. They improvised with what they had: copper nails, wooden patches, and sometimes a bit of iron scrap. They'd reinforce weak spots with extra planks or tighten loose fittings with makeshift tools. But every fix was temporary. It was a constant game of patch and pray. And here's the kicker. Modern ships have sensors, steel reinforced with alloys, and advanced diagnostics. Back then, it was all human judgment and hope. Think about that. Sailors relied on their senses, their experience, and sheer grit. They could tell by the sound of a creak or the feel of a tremor if failure was near. And if the worst happened, they'd bandage wounds, pour seawater, or burn a little iron to cauterize. It sounds primitive, but it was all they had. Imagine a young sailor, just 17, seeing his ship fracture in half. His heart pounding, fingers trembling, he clings to a piece of wreckage, blood pouring from a ferro-induced injury. Another crew member screams for help, desperately pressing cloth to a severed finger. The scene is chaos, sounds of splintering wood, screams, the rush of salt water, the metallic clink of iron. And yet, amidst all that horror, they fought to survive. Now, compare that to what we have today. Modern ships are built with corrosion-resistant alloys, sensors detect cracks before failure, and onboard medical supplies can treat wounds. instantly. No more waiting days for a doctor, or fixing with sailcloth and molten iron. The evolution is astonishing, but the human stories behind those pharaoh failures are what truly resonate. Men risking their lives, improvising with limited tools, battling injuries and despair, those are the stories. Etched into history's scars, every Kraken failure was a human tragedy, a test of endurance, courage, and ingenuity. And if you want to dive deeper into how these accidents shaped maritime history, how sailors faced death with little more than hope and metal tools, I've got plenty more stories to tell. The scars aren't just on ships or metal, they're on human lives, on human resilience. So stay tuned, because behind every shipwreck, every pharaoh accident, there's a human story waiting to be uncovered. Stories of heroism, despair, and survival that remind us how far we've come. And trust me, when you understand their struggles, you gain a new appreciation for the safety and comfort we enjoy today. Imagine yourself aboard a wooden vessel, miles away from land, surrounded by the endless, unforgiving ocean. You can feel the salty spray on your skin, hear the creak of the shifting planks beneath your feet, and smell the bitter tang of mildew mixed with seawater. Now picture what it was like when things went wrong, when a crack in the hull or a burst pipe sent panic through the crew. Back then, ships were fragile giants, and a small pharaoh crack could turn into a disaster in an instant. The human stories behind these iron failures are haunting, revealing the raw courage and resilience of sailors facing death with whatever tools they had. Let's talk about one of the most deadly threats, pharaoh cracks. These were tiny fractures in the iron hull, often invisible but deadly. A crack could grow silently, and if left unnoticed, it might rupture suddenly during a storm or high tide, flooding the ship in minutes. Imagine a crew member standing watch, eyes strained in the dim lantern light, when suddenly a shudder runs through the vessel. The ship groans loudly, wood splinters, wood. Water rushes in, chaos erupts. Men scramble, shouting orders, trying to plug the breach with whatever they have, planks, cloth, even clay. Now, picture the worst. A sailor caught beneath the collapsing hull, trapped, bleeding from cuts caused by splintered metal. His heart races as he clings to debris, blood mixing with seawater. His mind flashes through his family, his home port, and he fights to stay conscious. Others are frantically sealing leaks, pouring seawater on burns, trying to slow the flood. Sometimes they resorted to primitive methods, burning iron to cauterize wounds, improvising with molten metal from their stove. Cruel but real. They didn't have the sophisticated medical supplies we take for granted today, and it wasn't just the hulls cracking. Pharaoh failures could cause fires, explosions, or leaks that sank ships in hours. The stress was unimaginable. Men would wake up to the cold steel bite of a crack, their hands trembling as they tried to patch a gash that could be 2,000 trees thick. Imagine the fear. Every creak could be the sound of your ship tearing apart. The mental toll was immense. Some sailors survived, scarred physically and psychologically. The constant threat of drowning or injury haunted them, leaving scars that wouldn't fade. But not all pharaoh failures were immediate death sentences. Sometimes crews managed heroic feats of repair. With limited tools, hammers, chisels, molten iron, they fought to contain the damage. They used tar, pitch, and wooden wedges to stem the flood. The smell of burning iron mixed with salt and sweat filled the air. It was a desperate dance against time. Sometimes their efforts bought days, sometimes only minutes. The human willpower was astonishing. Men, often young, 17, 21, faced death without hesitation. They had no choice but to confront their fears, to patch, to seal, to pray. And then there were the psychological scars. Imagine the trauma of surviving a pharaoh rupture, knowing that one misstep could be your last. Some sailors became paranoid, afraid of every creak and groan. Others grew numb to the chaos, hardened by the endless danger. Many couldn't forget the faces of fallen comrades, their blood staining the deck, the screams echoing in their minds long after the ship limped into harbor. Let's step back for a moment and realize how different all this is from today's ships. Modern vessels are built from corrosion-resistant alloys, with sensors that detect metal fatigue long before it causes a crack. Instead of improvisation, we have algorithms and remote diagnostics. Medical supplies can treat injuries instantly, antiseptics, stitches, painkillers, and if a ship is in trouble, it can communicate with rescue teams and get help before disaster strikes. No more waiting in terror, hoping the patch holds. Today, we owe a debt of gratitude to those sailors who faced Pharaoh failures with nothing but their courage and limited tools. Their sacrifices and struggles laid the groundwork for safer maritime travel. Their stories remind us that resilience isn't just about strong ships, it's about the human spirit. Every scar, every story of survival is a testament to that. Think about the moments of pure human grit. Imagine a crew member with bloodied hands, exhausted but refusing to give up, pouring molten iron into a crack in the hull, hearing the crackle as it cools, or the young sailor whose trembling hands tighten a wooden wedge, praying the ship holds. They faced the cold, cruel ocean, knowing that a single failure could mean disaster, not just for themselves but for everyone on board. You see, the real legacy of these stories isn't just the ships they built or the battles they fought. It's the resilience of the human beings who refused to surrender, who fought through pain, fear, and despair. They transformed tragedy into survival. Their courage echoes through history, a silent roar reminding us how far we've come. Today we're protected by technology, safety standards, and medical advances, but in the silent shadows of history, we find the real heroes, those anonymous sailors risking everything with trembling hands and unbreakable hearts. Their sacrifices are woven into the fabric of maritime history, a testament to human endurance. So, next time you look at a modern ship or hear about technological marvels, take a moment to think about the sailors of the past, their struggles, their sacrifices, and their unwavering courage. Because behind every safe voyage today, there's a story of human resilience that refused to sink. If you found these stories inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Next time, we'll dive into even more incredible tales from the age of sail, where the human spirit faced the vast, relentless ocean and won. Remember, the courage of those sailors isn't just part of history, it's part of us. Their sacrifices remind us that even in the darkest moments, human resilience can shine brighter than the stars guiding their ships home.